Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Parallel to its diplomatic engagement with world powers to try and resolve the nuclear crisis, the Islamic Republic of Iran is engaged in a public campaign to persuade the media and public opinion of its narrative regarding the crisis. A dominant theme in this narrative is Iranian victimization and mistreatment by a so-called bullying hegemonic West. Meanwhile, the P5+1, which consists south of the United States, Russia, China, France, Britain, and Germany, have shown no inclination to directly discredit the narrative or seek to undercut its influence, in which Tehran claims it has done no wrong in the nuclear realm. With us to discuss this are the co-author of an article on the matter published at the Institute for National Security Studies, Dr. Emily Landau. Welcome.
Hi.
I'd like also to welcome Mr. Meir Javed Anfar, who is an Iranian politics lecturer at the IDC in Herzliya. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mati Shoshani.
It's good to be here.
Mati, make sense out of this.
Well, let's just zoom out for a minute. The Iranians have pulled an incredible media trick. If so far, and to a certain degree, people believed, yes, Iranians are evil, with their nuclear plan and so on and so forth, they've, to a certain extent, managed to draw attention to a different issue, saying, look, the West is coming after us, look what it's done to our economy. All we want, and you hear this a lot, is we want a peaceful nuclear program, just like anyone else. Please leave us alone. We're just trying to have a nuclear program. Why can you have it and not us? Again and again and again. And people have sort of lost sight, and you see this in the negotiations, and also in the press releases from Western countries. They've lost sight of the big target, which is, of course, a nuclear capability. And people are now discussing, more of these things that in the past were not on the table at all. Having some of the nuclear facilities continue to exist, and we'll hear more about it in a few minutes. Now suddenly they're talking about it. Yes, you can have these facilities. Yes, we're going to move some of the sanctions and so on and so forth. So they've, in a very clever way, managed to sort of put on the table things that were never an option and sort of create this, again, this image of them being a victim of again, Western brutality, countries putting pressure on them when they, as if they did nothing wrong.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Landau, you have researched this in depth, and one of the points that the Iranians continuously focus on is the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which actually wants to encourage it to have a peaceful nuclear program. What is the problem there?
Well, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty doesn't actually encourage states to have a civilian nuclear program, but you're absolutely correct that a major provision of the NPT is to allow the non-nuclear weapon states that are members of the NPT to engage in civilian and nuclear programs. And the reason is that when the NPT was first created, it was created in a manner in which it was clear that there would remain nuclear weapon states that are members of the treaty and non-nuclear weapon states. Of course, the group of nuclear weapon states is only the 5 recognized nuclear powers who are today the permanent members of the Security Council. All the rest have to join as non-nuclear weapon states, and the thinking was that these states need to be compensated, because if we, the nuclear weapon states, are allowed to keep our nuclear weapons, we have to give something to the non-nuclear weapon states as an incentive to join in that status. And thus was born famous Article 4 of the NPT, which indeed gives them the right to a civilian nuclear program. Mm-hmm. What happened is that over the years, in the beginning, this was a treaty that was that came into force in 1970. So we're talking about a treaty that was negotiated in the late 1960s. The states that were states of concern as far as nuclear proliferation back then were states like Sweden, which was on the verge of having a nuclear weapons capability. Canada, an advanced nuclear state. In the Middle East, Israel, of course, was on their minds, but states that were not raising concerns as far as their behavior in the region or globally. What happened is that over the years, states like Iran, Iraq, North Korea, Syria abused this as a means of creating a military nuclear program under the cover of a civilian nuclear program, because the technology is the same technology. It's dual-use technology. So the same technology that you can use for a civilian nuclear program, which is legitimate according to the NPT, they are secretly using as a cover for a military nuclear program, which is obviously not allowed according to the NPT. Iran's refrain over the years is a constant. It is our right to enrich uranium according to the NPT. You have not presented any evidence of our wrongdoing. And here we come to the main stumbling block, to my mind, in the negotiations going on right now, and this is Iran's work on weaponization aspects of its nuclear program. There is a whole set of questions that the IAEA has for Iran with regard to these activities. Iran has been stonewalling this investigation for years.
I'd like actually to come back to the IAEA investigation soon. Mr. Javed Anfal, the Iranian regime has continuously tried to picture itself as a victim in this whole process, being allegedly bullied by the international community and the P5+1, with crippling sanctions which have crippled its economy, has put its regime into a little of a pickle when it comes to stability. How do they portray this message to the international community?
I think to the international community, Iran has always said that it wants its right to a civilian nuclear program to be recognized. Iran never says that it wants a nuclear weapon. In fact, there's a censorship, there's a very strong censorship in place in Iran, that no official and no publication can ever talk about Iran wanting to have nuclear weapons. In fact, they can't even talk about the advantages of a nuclear weapon to Iran. So there's a very strong censorship. They're portraying this program as something that it's Iran's right to science, first of all. They are saying that the world doesn't want Iran to make progress in the scientific field. But also they portray it as that the international community doesn't want Iran to become self-sufficient. A big theme of the revolution in 1979 was independence. Iran not being dependent on other countries, especially the great powers. And they see a civilian nuclear program being part of this identity which the post-79 revolution wanted to create. And now, of course, it's gone beyond that. It is turned into, the nuclear program is turned into a domestic political issue in Iran, where the hardliners use it in order to sideline the moderates. How? They basically use the nuclear program to create confrontation with the West, because by doing so, not only they maintain what they say is the independence of the revolution, it also sidelines and weakens the moderates inside Iran who want to have better relations with the West.
Mati?
I just want to, again, zoom out and introduce another topic that we sort of was behind the scenes, is one, why Iran is negotiating right now, and just to talk about the economic, you're talking about internal issues in Iran. Just to remind our viewers at home, we've talked about this in the past, there are two big financial constraints on the Iranian economy right now. One, of course, is the sanctions that have been going on for several years, and another is the price of crude oil that's gone down dramatically. So they've taken a serious blow to their economy. So when we're talking about the things that lead them or keep them at the negotiations table, that's one of them. Another big issue that has not been on the table and is very important is the delivery method. How are they going to get a bomb to other countries? And no one's talking about it. They've been developing a, what you call, strategic missile plan. They have missiles with a range of, as far as I know, over 2,500 kilometers, and possibly more in the years to come. Long-range missiles that, I mean, if you look at it, what else could they want to do with it? What are they going to do with these missiles? And somehow this issue has not been on the table. So we're talking about the negotiations, they're talking, a bomb, or if it's for peaceful use. But when you look at it from the outside, one, they're investing heavily in a way to deliver a bomb. And secondly, their financial investment in this, the hit they've taken, both on the oil not being able to be sold and then the prices going down and the sanctions, is dramatic. So they're still very much invested into this, let's call it, what we perceive to be a nuclear capability.
Dr. Landau?
Well, definitely. The ballistic missile issue is a crucial issue with regard to a nuclear weapons capability. It's one component of a nuclear weapon, as we know. You need the fissile material to have the explosion. You need to know how to make the warhead, and you need the delivery mechanism. And you're absolutely right that for some reason ballistic missiles are not on the table in the negotiations. But the weaponization issue that I started to mention before is even more curious, because Iran's actual work on weaponization aspects of its nuclear program is the smoking gun issue. In other words, this is the most important evidence that the P5+1 could have in their negotiations with Iran, the strongest card that they had to play, that they have to play. And for some reason, they are not pressing Iran on this, and they're enabling Iran to continue with what we call in the article that you mentioned, Iran's nuclear fairy tale. And their fairy tale is, we have done no wrong in the nuclear realm. And until the international negotiators finally undermine this message and bring the weaponization issue, these questions that the IAEA has, and Iran has been stonewalling, until that is brought into the negotiation and Iran is put face to face with the evidence that there is with regard to these weaponization activities, they're letting Iran off the hook on a major issue that helps them with their narrative of we've done no wrong, so what do you want from us? You're just giving us a hard time. You're the West. You bully us. You don't allow us scientific advancement. And to bring them to the point where they say, no, you have done wrong in the nuclear realm, and that's why this negotiation is taking place. That's why all of our demands for dismantlement, for closing facilities, et cetera, et cetera.
I would like actually to receive your prospect on the Iranians have stonewalled, as you said, the IAEA, and have made it practically impossible for the inspectors to truly get to the places which have been under question, and there have been certain concerns since Yokia Amano took office. How is the IAEA actually continuing its investigation while the political levels of the P5+1 actually is interested in closing the deal as quickly as possible?
Well, this is one of the biggest problems with this negotiation. The IAEA is conducting a parallel process vis-a-vis Iran. October 25th, there was an important deadline that the IAEA gave Iran to answer just 2 of the questions on their list. They have a list of 12 questions. And the deadline came and went. Iran did not provide the answers. Amano, the head of the IAEA, has said several times, most recently in a report that came out 2.5 weeks ago, that Iran is not cooperating with the investigation. And yet, the political negotiation goes on. So you have to ask yourself, if all of this is actually about Iran's violation of the NPT, and its weaponization activities are the most blatant violation of the NPT, how are these political negotiations going on without bringing that squarely into the negotiation?
Mr. Javed Namfel?
You know, we discuss, Emily and I usually talk about what's a good deal and what's a bad deal with Iran, and what are the criteria, but it differs from with each person, each government. One of the criteria of a bad deal for me would be if the issue of weaponization is not included in terms of lifting sanctions, because if there is a deal, some of the sanctions are going to be lifted, but some of them will remain. If President Obama does not make Iran having to answer questions about past military work conditional upon removing sanctions, that will be one of the criteria of a bad deal. There's no doubt about that. The Iranian regime has responded to pressure. It understands pressure because it's a very rational regime. It has got its own costs and risk and reward analysis, and when it's confronted with a high price, it backs off, much like every other rational organization. But the issue regarding missiles is a little bit more tricky, and this is kind of, I'd like to bring my own point of view into it. One of the reasons why Iran lost the war, during the Iran-Iraq war, first of all, we were attacked by the Iraqi Air Force, which was supplied by the French and the Russians that had the state-of-the-art aircraft. Of course, the Iranian regime made a crucial mistake of breaking relations with the United States, because that kind of stopped the supply of spare parts for Iran's American-made jets. These things were bad, but just after my family left Iran in 1987, they started using Scud missiles against Tehran. And I know from Jewish citizens of Tehran and non-Jewish, these things brought terror among the citizens of Tehran. They were destroying and flattening complete neighborhoods. Now, to the Iranians, the missile force is seen as a deterrence against another missile attack. Is it could it possibly later on be used in order to have a nuclear warhead on it? Perhaps if the PMD, if the possible military dimension issue is not addressed. But they have also their own security concerns. They don't have a air force. The air force is not very strong. They have been attacked with missiles before. I don't want them to have missiles that could reach Israel either. But these things have had also other uses for Iran in terms of them being a victim of missile attacks. But more importantly, it has not been part of the deal from the beginning. We can't bring it in now, and as a new dimension, because it could ruin it could not only ruin the negotiations, but more importantly, it could weaken the hand of the West in the negotiations.
Yeah, just a caveat on that. The ballistic missiles that can carry a nuclear warhead, and Iran has lots of those type of missiles, is something that was included in a UN Security Council resolution from June of 2010. So it's not that it was outside the discussion. When they began this current round of negotiations, they decided to leave those out, but they are in a Security Council resolution from just 2010. Beyond that, Iran could have legitimate defensive needs for a certain amount of ballistic missiles, and yes, it does have that experience. But they are working on programs that have to do with ICBMs, which are intercontinental ballistic missiles, that you don't need for those reasons. These are missiles that will reach Europe and beyond Europe. They're looking towards the United States, and you don't create those kind of missiles if you're not thinking about them in the nuclear realm. And therefore, this issue is tremendously serious.
Is it impossible to have ICBMs without nuclear warheads?
You don't put all of the energy and resources into that.
That's the bottom line.
But is it impossible? Impossible? Nobody has ever done it?
No,
I don't know. I'm just asking.
No, because the two superpowers that are the ones that have those types of missiles, obviously they were for nuclear weapons.
Let's just go back to the negotiation issue, because you mentioned this sometimes, just for the sake of our viewers at home. I mean, if you follow the news and what the heads of state are saying, there is no lack of information as to the intent of Iran. I mean, it's clear to everyone what's, I'm not saying, I'm not saying it's clear to everyone what they're going for. So when they say, they're not cooperating, it's not as if people don't have information. Oh, we're not sure. Possibly they stopped with their their military program, and they've, we just don't have the information. They have the information. Barack Obama, the heads of state in Europe, they have a brief on their table that says, this is what they're doing. We know exactly the numbers. It's not a question of that. What's happened is right now, and this is sort of a larger perspective, when you compare Iran's commitment to make political sacrifices, financially speaking, on every level, compared to that of the P5+1, specifically the U.S., it's just not on the same level. They are committed to a much deeper level, they've invested heavily in it, and they're just willing to pay the price. So they're saying, we're just keeping on with the program, and on the other side, they see this, lackluster response. There's no one who wants to hit them on that. And if in the past, and part of this was Israel's involvement, they knew there was, to some degree, true or false, whatever, they had a sense that we might be hit in a military level. Now they know without the shadow of doubt, it's not happening anytime soon. So they know they can just push the boundaries more and more and more, and that's what they're doing. They said, we've already paid the price. Why not, why stop now? In the U.S., it's almost a game of them. It's not that they want to stop Iran from reaching a bomb. They want to save face. So Europe and the U.S. now are fighting a different battle, which is not to be the losers of these negotiations. So whatever they can hold on to, they're holding on to. And Iran says, everything's game. Let's get whatever we can in these negotiations.
Mr. Javanafo?
I actually disagree with that assessment. I think the Americans have actually been very smart in terms of dealing with Iran. One of the ways that they've been able to create this consensus to impose the tough sanctions against Iran is their willingness to recognize limited enrichment on Iran's soil. This has really been counterproductive to the Iranians. It has taken away a major part of their legitimization of their problems with the United States. They would much rather have somebody who says zero enrichment, because then they could say to the world, look, they're oppressing us. They're far more scared of President Obama than they are of Prime Minister Netanyahu, because President Obama makes it far more difficult for Khamenei to walk away from a deal, because he will have to justify to his own people that I walked away from a deal from somebody who in the history of the United States since 1979 has gone further than anybody else. This is, I think, this has been one of the ways that Obama has challenged them, and in a very smart way. Whether the Americans I'm not sure you're saying it, but are they desperate for a deal? I think they want a deal, but I don't think they're willing to give it to them at any price. I think one of the major stumbling blocks why perhaps there won't be a deal, and it's not sure, is that the Iranians want all the sanctions to be removed at the first level as soon as there's an agreement. I'm not sure President Obama is going to do that.
Dr. Landau?
Look, I think there's a question of whether the Obama administration will go for a deal at any price or not. I would agree with you, maybe not at any price, but definitely what they are projecting to the Iranians is that they're willing to go a long way towards Iran's demands without Iran showing very much flexibility at all. We hear mainly from Iran the same intransigence, the no, no, no that we've been hearing from the beginning. And yet we see the P5+1 getting closer to Iran because the P5+1 are making the concessions. So whether they will go all the way to Iran's interests, maybe not. And that's why each round we hear, optimism, things are going well until it gets to the final crunch. And then we hear, well, the gaps are still large because maybe the Americans still have some, interest in not giving away everything. But in the negotiation dynamic, unfortunately, they're projecting to Iran that they'll go very far.
My question, though, here is, I'd like to pull back to our discussion on Iran's manipulation of the media and the public opinion also, both in the international community and also domestically. I'd like to understand the dynamic here. What is Iran's interest in working so hard in improving its image in front of the international community, and what are its interests of being an international player right now, being part of the battle against the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant and other aspects of it?
Look, Iran is not, if we compare, let's say, to North Korea, and I'm making the comparison because they're both determined proliferators who have been moving forward and confronting the international community since 2003. If we compare Iran to North Korea, we see a different country. North Korea is isolationist, not interested really in any interaction with the international community, extremely isolationist. Iran is not that kind of country. Iran does want to engage. Iran wants to get back to economic ties with Europe. This is very clear. They're dying for that to happen. Unfortunately, the Europeans are also dying to get back to economic ties with Iran, and this is one of the problems. So Iran has a very strong interest in turning to the international community for economic ties to be reintegrated, but they want to be reintegrated on their terms. And this is where the problem is. They want to be reintegrated as a very strong power in the Middle East that is the one that will be calling the shots in our region. And that's something that is very dangerous and I think so far has proven unacceptable to the P5+1. But Iran wants to say to the international community very clearly, look, we have done nothing wrong. They are just on our case. They're giving us a hard time. They don't give anyone else as hard a time as they give us. We have all of these inspections. We have all of this cooperation, and still nothing satisfies them. And they forget just one small point. Oops, they've been working on a military nuclear capability for decades. And this is the problem. This is where it starts, and this is where it should end.
Mr. Javedanfel?
I'm not sure that such a narrative is being accepted in the West, perhaps in the press by some people, or perhaps by some academics. I see the way that the P5+1 is together, despite the fact that the Russians and the Americans have great differences over Crimea, they're still together against Iran. I read an article that the Iranians, it was in the Times of London, they tried very hard to reach out to the Chinese and the Russian ambassador in Tehran on many occasions in order to lure them away from the P5+1. It didn't work. The Iranians have their narrative has mileage when they say we deserve a right to have a nuclear program for civilian purposes, when you see so many other countries are using it. In terms of saying that we are a victim and we're just being picked on, the Russians don't even buy that. And the Chinese, who like to go alongside the Russians, don't accept it either. So I don't see this being really changing the dynamics of the negotiations. I'll go a step further. In my humble opinion, and I've spoken to quite a few Iranians who left Europe, Sometimes, Emily hears me sometimes saying that, we should recognize Iran's right to enrich because this is the right of the Iranian people. Well, you know what, Emily? I've spoken to Iranians who say we don't even want that right anymore. This regime kills us, tortures us, imprisons us.
Here we are
and
totally in agreement.
And look what they've done. I disagree with that. I mean, I disagree with the rights issue, but look at the way this regime is carrying on with the nuclear program. It's bankrupting our nuclear program. We don't even want it. We don't want anything. They should just get rid of the sanctions. We're willing to pay the price. So if the regime is not even successful in convincing its own population of its narrative that it's been whited and white, I'm not so sure that it's going to be successful in changing.
The question is to what cost? Mati?
You sort of raised the question of why is Iran, making the effort of having a nuclear bomb, and we're talking about the nature of this country. This is a country, when you look at it again from a macro level, that has this theology of expansion, of spreading their ideology throughout the Middle East and, later, hopefully, in their eyes, to the rest of the world. They've invested heavily. When you look at the money trail, they've invested tens of billions of dollars in global terrorism. They financed Hezbollah, they financed terrorist attacks around the world against targets of what they see to be symbols of the West. So it's not just this one isolated issue. They have a theology, they have a mentality, they want to expand, they want to broaden not just the borders of the country, but of this religious idea, and they're investing in that in the long term. Not only that, they're not the only ones in the Middle East. Turkey suffers from similar problems.
Qatar to Saudi Arabia,
yes,
to
and also
Iraq,
they have a problem. They have a financial problem. They have a demographic problem of a dwindling younger generation, of an aging society with an economy that isn't expanding in a proper growth. So they're facing many threats, and this is sort of this they have to make a statement today. They have to expand. They have to show something for all their efforts, and the bomb is just one of many of these different things.
Well, we're summing up this program. Emily, one sentence for you.
Well, I think we can both agree that the Iranian people do not deserve the regime that they have, and that's very clear. They're a big problem here, and I think the population is sick of this death to America and death to Israel and all of the sacrifices that they're paying for the nuclear issue. And what can we say? We would all hope that they would have a government that was more responsive to them. Obviously, what we're seeing is the exact opposite.
Mr. Javanfo?
On the other side of the coin, I agree with you 100%. If there's democracy tomorrow in Iran, they will want a nuclear program, and it's quite possible that the Iranian people will also want a nuclear weapon. After Saddam Hussein used chemicals, weapons of mass destruction against them, and the world said nothing, then we may be faced with the same challenges, but this time with a democratic Iran, which will hopefully not be a threat to Israel. In fact, I'm sure it won't be.
Mr. Meir Javanfo, thank you so much for being here. Dr. Emily Landau, it's been a pleasure. Mati, it's always nice to have you here with us.
Always good to be here.
And I'd like to thank our viewers, and we will see you next week.